the name of Baroness Williams of Trafford. The time limit is 1 hour. Motion to approve the Terrorism Act 2000, Proscribed Organisations, Amendment No. 2 Order 2020. Baroness Williams of Trafford.
My Lords, I beg to move that the Terrorism Act 2000 Proscribed Organisations Amendment No. 2 Order 2020, which lay before this House on the 13th of July, be approved. The threat level in the UK, which is set by the Independent Joint Terrorism Analysis Centre, remains at substantial. This means a terrorist attack in our country is highly likely and could occur without warning. The threat we face from Islamist terrorism remains significant, but as Assistant Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police Service and National League for Counter-Terrorism Policing, Neil Bassus, has said, right-wing terrorism is the fastest-growing terror threat in the UK. We can never entirely eliminate the threat from terrorism, but we are determined to do all we can to minimise the danger it poses and to keep the public safe. The nature of terrorism is constantly evolving. There are organisations which recruit, radicalise, promote and encourage terrorism, as well as those which actually commit terrible acts of violence against innocent people. Proscription is an important part of the government's strategy to disrupt the full range of terrorist activities. The group we now propose to add to the list of terrorist organisations amending Schedule 2 to the Terrorism Act 2000 is Fua Creek Division, or FKD. This is the 25th order under Section 3(3)A of that Act. This government is committed to tackling terrorism regardless of what motivates it. FKD is a white supremacist group whose views and ideologies stand in direct contrast to the core values of Britain. Their actions which seek to divide communities and stir up hatred are entirely contrary to the interests of our nation. Proscribing this group will prevent its membership growing and work to stop the spread of propaganda which allows a culture of hatred and division to thrive. It would also help to prevent FKD from radicalising people who may be vulnerable to extreme ideologies and at risk of emulating the terrorist acts which they glorify. Under Section 3 of the Terrorism Act 2000, the Home Secretary has the power to proscribe an organisation if she believes it is currently concerned in terrorism. If the statutory test is met, the Home Secretary may then exercise her discretion to proscribe that organisation. The Home Secretary takes into account a number of factors in considering whether to exercise this discretion. These include the nature and scale of an organisation's activities and the need to support other members of the international community in tackling terrorism. The effect of proscription is to outlaw a listed organisation and ensure that it is unable to operate in the UK. It is a criminal offence for a person to belong to, support or arrange a meeting in support of a proscribed organisation, or wear clothing or carry articles in public which arouse reasonable suspicion that an individual is a member or supporter of a proscribed organisation. Proscription acts to halt fundraising and recruitment and makes it possible to seize cash associated with the organisation. Given its wide-ranging impact, the Home Secretary only exercises her power to prescribe after thoroughly reviewing the available evidence on an organisation. This includes open source material, intelligence material and advice that reflects consultation across government, including with the intelligence and law enforcement agencies. The Cross-Government Prescription Review Group supports the Home Secretary in her decision-making process. The Home Secretary's decision to prescribe is only taken after great care and consideration of the particular case, and it is appropriate that it must be approved by both houses. Having carefully considered all the evidence, the Home Secretary believes FKD is currently concerned in terrorism and the discretionary factors weigh in favour of proscription. I can't comment on specific intelligence, but I can provide the House with a summary of the group's activities. This order prescribes FKD, a white supremacist group founded in late 2018, which has an international footprint with members across North America and Europe. The group celebrates the concepts promoted in a collection of essays which advocate the use of violence and mass murder in pursuit of an apocalyptic race war. Whilst the bulk of their activity is online, members have engaged in distributing violent, racist and anti-Semitic propaganda. In mid-2019, the group reportedly called for the deaths of a European Parliament politician and YouTube's chief executive officer. FKD members have been arrested on terrorism charges, both in the UK and overseas. In 2019, US authorities charged several individuals with a variety of offences, including weapons charges, plotting to bomb a synagogue and attacking members of the LGBTQ community, plotting to bomb a major news network, and distributing information related to explosives and weapons of mass destruction. In September of 2019, UK police apprehended a 16-year-old on suspicion of the commission, preparation and instigation of acts of terrorism. As a result of this, the group distributed amongst its members a list of police buildings and an image of the Chief Constable of West Midlands Police with a gun to his head and the words "race traitor" across his eyes, urging members to carry out attacks in retaliation for the arrest of one of its followers. In October of 2019, a 21-year-old appeared in court in London, charged with terror offences relating to his purported support for FKD. He allegedly encouraged the mass murder of members of the Jewish and LGBTQ communities. FKD members have condoned and glorified acts of terrorism. This includes the Charleston church shooting, the synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh, the Oklahoma City bombing and Christchurch shooting. My Lords, our strategy to combat terrorism looks at the full spectrum of activity. This includes ensuring groups who call for violence and mass murder and who unlawfully glorify horrific terrorist acts are prevented from continuing to stir up hatred and encouraging violence. In addition, the government's counter-extremism strategy challenges extremism in all its forms. Alongside this and our prevent work, we will continue to monitor whether extremist groups have crossed into terrorism. I believe it's right that we add FKD to the list of proscribed organisations in Schedule 2 of the Terrorism Act 2000. Subject to the agreement of this House and the other place, the order will come into force on Friday, the 17th of July.
The question is, this motion be agreed to? I call the next speaker, Lord Wood of Anfield.
My Lords, my thanks to the Minister for setting out the facts of the case with regard to FKD, and I of course support the inclusion of them on the proscribed terrorist organisations list. I will be very brief. I just had a couple of questions about the system by which terrorist organisations get proscribed. Firstly, and this is with reference to previous cases, in particular Kurdish terrorist organisations, can the Minister explain what material difference it makes to redesignate an organisation on the proscribed list as a separate terrorist organisation rather than an affiliate of another large organisation? That's been the subject of previous orders and I'm sure future orders. And secondly, would the Minister agree that there is a need for a better, more internationally coordinated system for the designation of proscribed terrorist organisations? I should declare an interest here as Chair of the United Nations Association UK, but there is currently no UN system for designating terrorist organisations. There is just a collection of organisations with approved sanctions passed by individual resolution, and each country then has its own lists which may or may not overlap with other countries. Should the UK not be arguing for a multinational regime capable of providing comprehensive and authoritative lists that would be expected at least to be binding across countries with regard to proscribed organisations? Thank you.
Baroness Ludford.
My Lords, the case for adding the Feuerkrieg division to the list of organisations proscribed under the Terrorism Act seems strong. Its very name, fire war, is calculated to convey violence and hate, and I trust the Home Secretary to be acting on sound intelligence about the activities of this group. The current independent reviewer of terrorism legislation, Jonathan Hall QC, has called it a violent extreme white supremacist group. If this SI passes, the group will join National Action and Sonnenkrieg Division as banned far-right groups. It is encouraging that the system is getting to grips with this strand of terrorism as well as with others. But I wanted to say something about the unsatisfactory state of affairs regarding the list itself, expressed forcefully by successive independent reviewers, such as Lord David Anderson QC and by the current one. Lord Anderson, in his report in 2015, called the continued proscription of 14 groups which no longer met the statutory test an affront to the rule of law. He sought unsuccessfully during passage of the last counter-terrorism bill to get a review scheme with support from my party. Mr. Hall's first report relating to 2018 was published in March this year. In it, he noted that the proscription has powerful effects on persons and groups beyond the proscribed body itself. This is particularly true for agencies and charities working overseas. But unlike for financial sanctions or designated area orders, proscription is neither time-limited nor subject to periodic review. He concluded there is little excuse for not keeping the list of proscribed organisations up to date. He noted that in its sole decision to date on the PMOI case in 2007, the Proscribed Organisations Appeals Commission stated, albeit obiter, that it was the duty of the Secretary of State to hold periodic reviews. Mr. Hall went on, the judges observed that it was incumbent on the Secretary of State to consider at regular intervals whether the power to deprescribe should be exercised. This was because it cannot have been Parliament's intention that an organisation which there were no longer any grounds for believing is currently concerned in terrorism should remain on the list for any longer than is absolutely necessary. The court was told at that time that the Home Secretary did carry out approximately annual reviews, but this practice ended in 2014. Mr. Hall's recommendation, perhaps to get round the government's objection, however flimsy, that you would have to divert resources to regular review exercises, was that proscription orders should automatically lapse after 3 years unless extended. When will the government agree to this sensible reform?
Lord Bourne of Aberystwyth.
My Lords, could I thank my noble friend, the Minister, for setting out the position with such clarity. It is chilling that these right-wing groups, the white supremacist group in this case, are the fastest growing terrorism threat to our country, as Neil Basu of the Metropolitan Police has rightly said. And there are obviously echoes of this in the PREVENT programme, which I know the Minister, my noble friend, is familiar with, that the right-wing threat is, far right-wing threat is a growing one. Could I also say how much we value the work of the police and our security services for the incredible work that they do. The threat of terrorism is, of course, evolving, and I appreciate the need to be nimble and stay ahead of the curve. My point, perhaps in contrast to that of the noble lady Baroness Ludford, is more about groups that should be added to the list rather than proscription, though I will say something briefly on that too. I appreciate that my noble friend will not want to comment on groups that pose particular threats and that may be added to the list, but I just do seek reassurance, as I know this was also raised in the Commons, about groups that are well known and have been highlighted, for example, by Hope Not Hate, who do valuable work in this regard, as I know my noble friend is familiar with the work they do from working with them. But will she confirm that we will, where necessary, have laser-like scrutiny of these groups and act swiftly where there is a clear and present danger, as I believe there is from some of these groups? If I could move to the issue of deproscription, which the noble lady Baroness Ludford did raise, the explanatory memorandum to this order does make it clear in clause 14 that the minister, the Home Secretary in this case no doubt, if a proscribed organisation or any person affected by it raises the issue and applies to the Secretary of State, that the prescription of this organisation will be reviewed. My point here is that it shouldn't be done too readily, that I appreciate that that is a reasonable mechanism, but I would seek reassurance from my noble friend that we are not too swift to deprescribe organisations where there remains a clear and present danger from them, though I accept if there is no such danger, then there does seem little reason for continuing prescription.
Lord Hussain.
My Lords, United Kingdom has suffered immensely and continues to be under threat from terrorism, and we have responsibility to legislate and amend existing legislation wherever it demands to protect our people from menace of the terrorism. The FKD is a dangerous far-right organization which is to be added to the list of banned terrorist groups, and I very much welcome this move. It seems they have been extremely active online and encourage violent action against sections of the community, including Jewish and the LGBT people. They welcome the Christchurch killing. The rise of the far-right terrorist organization are a threat to peaceful people and around the world. And there is evidence that they groom and poise the minds of young people to their violent and hateful cause. We must be constantly vigilant towards organized groups like this who are advocating hate and violence. The rise of far right that has become a big threat to our democracy, although the perception is that it is always the Islamist groups. While supporting this amendment, may I add how proud we are of our freedom of expression and democratic values that we enjoy under the British law. This freedom has also allowed many people from different parts of the world to escape oppression and persecution in their own countries and take refuge in the United Kingdom. From here, many of them continue to fight their battle of rights in their countries of origin. I'm sure many of your lordships have come across some of such cases during their political life. I certainly have. Through their campaign, they highlight the plight of people like them in their own countries and expose their governments. That is often seen as an insult and embarrassment for their native governments. As a result, from time to time, we may find some of those individuals or organizations being outlawed by the governments of their native countries. In some cases, those governments may even go further by using diplomatic channels, asking the British government to follow suit and ban those organizations and or extradite individuals involved. I hope the Noble Baroness, the Minister, can assure the House that under no circumstances the British government will entertain such requests from any countries, no matter how strong links Britain may have with them, unless the individual or organization concerned have broken the law of this country.
Yes. Lord Burness.
Thank you, my Lord Chairman. My Lords, I thank my noble friend the Minister for her presentation and explanation of this measure. However, I do question why we're considering this measure in July 2020, when according to the policy background of the explanatory memorandum, this organisation's been on the radar here and elsewhere since late 2018, and arrests made in the UK and the US, and its leader, alleged leader, a 13-year-old boy, tracked down in Estonia at the beginning of the year. Furthermore, the organisation has apparently been dissolved. So will we need a fresh order if it reappears under another name? And do we know who the members might be who become active in other organisations? Also, the explanatory memorandum in paragraph 3.1 talks about 3 organisations, but I am assuming that we are only dealing with this one particular organisation. I fear we're a bit behind the curve with our timing. When according to reports, the group which was established in the Baltic region, probably in Estonia, and the Estonian Security Service intervened in January 2020, 7 months ago. Did we get information about this directly from Estonia or through EU agencies? So a much wider question arises. If we're to be if we are to react expeditiously when such a group emerges, what arrangements will we have in place with the European Union post the 31st of December? May I again remind my noble friend that the political declaration signed by the Prime Minister spoke of an ambitious, broad, deep and flexible partnership, the security element of which would include law enforcement, judicial cooperation in criminal matters, security and defence. Future arrangements should allow for timely exchanges of intelligence and sensitive information between union bodies and the United Kingdom. I put it to my noble friend, that includes information about organisations such as this. May I ask, and with great respect, I hope my noble friend will not repeat the usual answer I receive either to written questions or indeed from the dispatch box, that it will depend on the outcome of negotiations. And let us know what progress we've made and what the consequences will be if we have no agreement on the 31st of December. I mean, I understand, my lords, we're planning to advertise the problems individuals and businesses are likely to face post-December of this year. Does that not signal that there's not much confidence about the outcome of the negotiations and an acceptance of no deal? I ask my noble friend, is the desire to be free of arrangements so great that even security matters are sacrificed?
Lord Prescott.
My Lords, I support the order before your Lordships has and prescribing the FKD. The FKD is clearly an odious, racist and anti-Semitic organisation which is a threat to our individual and collective security. It should be banned. For too long, the UK has tolerated fascist and terrorist groups in our midst, not only like the FKD, but also Middle Eastern extreme Islamist groups. Unfortunately, the UK has had a long history of tolerating or even supporting such groups. A prime example was the UK's and US's support for Osama bin Laden and the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, which led to the foundation of Al-Qaeda. Our meddling in the Middle East has not gone well in Iraq, Libya or Syria. The UK has often granted asylum to terrorist groups or taken them in after ill-fated adventures. Today we learned Shamina Begum and possibly other ISIS refugees and fighters will be allowed back into the UK. Does the noble lady, the Minister, have a comment on the Court of Appeal judgment, and will Her Majesty's government challenge it? My Lords, the UK has also funded and financially supported the White Helmets, despite that organisation only operating in terrorist-controlled areas of Syria. They have been filmed taking part in terrorist executions. The Netherlands and United States withdrew their financial support, but last year the UK gave asylum to 100 members of the White Helmets and their families. Will Her Majesty's government now declare the White Helmets a proscribed organisation? My Lords, the UK faces many security threats, both externally and from within. I hope that Her Majesty's government will do everything necessary to protect our citizens from those terrorist organisations which seek to destroy the cohesion and fabric of our society.
Baroness Altman.
My Lords, I support this instrument and the proscription of this Feuerkrieg division, FKD, which has tried to stir up hatred reminiscent of Europe's darkest times. And I commend the government on the work it is doing to try to stop the spread of the propaganda that cultivates the culture of hatred and division that we have worked so hard to overcome. It is important that we ensure such groups, whether they are from the left or the right, each of them, all of them are threats to our way of life and directly contrary to our core values. But my Lords, I wonder if I could ask my noble friend whether she can reassure the House that the police are resourced sufficiently to ensure that they can keep an eye on all the people who are involved in those activities. As other noble lords have mentioned, this group was dissolved in February of this year, but the people have not gone away. It is therefore vital that regardless of the organization's name, we have in place ways in which we can sufficiently track the activities of such people and send a strong and unambiguous message that condoning or glorifying acts of terrorism will never be tolerated. Clearly, it is difficult to act swiftly and also uphold the necessary due processes. But I do hope that my noble friend can assure us that the counterterrorism policing and their strategic partners do have sufficient resources to deal with these challenges. And I would also add my words of support for the excellent work of Hope Not Hate that my noble friend Lord Bourne mentioned. Equally, I would add my expression of concern to the words of my noble friend Lord Bowness about the potential of departing from the EU without a deal and what that would mean for security cooperation. And could my noble friend give the House an idea of how much of the security cooperation from the EU fed into the process that led to the banning of the FKD under this order?
Lord Mann.
Can I congratulate the Minister and the Home Secretary for their appropriate action in relation to FKD and the Sonnenkrieg division of the Atomwaffen division previously. And can I also commend the ADL in America, the Anti-Defamation League, who've been critical in exposing both of these organisations and with whom I have regular and constant communication and contact. Has there been a ministerial discussion with Estonian counterparts, considering that FKD and the Sonnenkrieg division appear to have strong Estonian links? And if not, would such a ministerial discussion be considered by government to see what we can learn about why there is such a growth of this kind of organisation in the Baltics?
Baroness Hamwey.
My lords, as other noble lords have said, the question isn't just why, but why now? And I'm certainly satisfied as to the former. The FKD seem to be, or have been, a thoroughly nasty, dangerous extremist organisation, and it's actually hard to find words to describe what one reads about them. A small international neo-Nazi organisation that embraces the most extreme interpretations of white supremacist ideology, according to a website, not its website, obviously. Apparently, it criticises and demeans other white supremacist movements, like the alt-right, for being too focused on public perception and unsuccessful in creating real societal change. A rather sinister application of deeds, not words. It says that there needs to be a war against a society controlled by Jews, that is inevitable and the only way to reset cultural and societal norms. Black lives don't matter. I'm sure that the official report will understand that those last four words are in quotes. Their advocacy is killing. And as I think the minister was alluding to, they target teenagers and young adults. My why now question is because the actions referred to in the explanatory memorandum and by the minister have mostly been outside the UK and took place a little while ago. Activities, at least those cited, in the UK were last autumn, one arrest without a prosecution and one alleged offence, as I read it, though there was the announcement, ironically, in this February this year, that the group would be dissolving. I'm not challenging the assessment that the group and its members remain active through channels other than Telegram, but would this order catch them? Can the Minister address this in her response? I think it links too with the questions from Lord Wood, Baroness Altman, Lord Bowness, and I'm glad that they've raised the international and EU dimensions. The House has heard that a former independent reviewer of terrorism legislation has described how the regime of prescription is undermined. More than that, the noble Lord Anderson of Ipswich described it as an affront to the rule of law by keeping on the list of organisations, organisations which have changed and are no longer concerned with terrorism. It is an affront, given the implications of the prescription for freedom of speech and the penalties carried with it. Yesterday, the campaigning organisation Hope Not Hate, whose name describes its purpose, welcomed this prescription but demanded to know why a group with only a handful of members in the UK was to be prescribed, but not the Order of Nine Angles, which it says are a violent Nazi group actively organising in the UK, whose beliefs have inspired several young people recently convicted of terrorism. Yesterday, they were encouraging people to tweet the Home Office to prescribe that group, which is still a threat to British people. Obviously, I don't expect the Minister to comment on that group, and I don't know whether she's been briefed about those tweets. There have now been many calls for regular and frequent proactive reviews of prescription orders by such reprobates as the current Independent Reviewer of Terrorism Legislation, Lord Anderson of Ipswich, the Home Affairs Select Committee, I know my noble friend Lord Paddock during the passage of the Counter-Terrorism and Border Security Act, and Baroness Ludford. I too take the view that the government should be under a duty to keep orders under review, to bring this into line with sanctions and the designation of areas, a duty to deprescribe. Noble Lord Bourne referred to what I think is the standard paragraph 14 about the right for a person affected by the prescription to apply for deprescription. I seem to remember during the Counter-Terrorism and Border Security Act that we queried how realistic this was, as the individual would be drawing attention to himself. And certainly, I believe that Lord Anderson referred to Noble Irish groups, Northern Irish groups, having a difficulty with pursuing this. The Minister in the Commons talked about orders such as this ensuring that groups that call for violence and mass murder are prevented from stirring up hatred. I wish that could be ensured, but the orders are one tool, and of course we don't oppose this order. But given how precious are our freedoms, again we call for the most careful and well-justified use of powers to restrict them, as well as the converse, the use of powers where that use defends those freedoms.
Rosser.
I thank the noble lady, the Minister, for her explanation of the content and purpose of this order, which we support, and which adds Feuerkrieg Division, FKD, to the list of proscribed organisations covered under Schedule 2 to the Terrorism Act 2000. This is, I believe, the 25th order under the Act. And could the noble lady, the Minister, to pursue points made by others, indicate how many organisations are still on the proscribed list, and also confirm that the government still considers that they all remain in existence, continuing to be concerned in terrorism? The Home Secretary can seek to have an organisation proscribed if and only if she believes that it's concerned in terrorism as defined in the Terrorism Act, and then decides to exercise her discretion to do so. And prescription means outlawing an organisation and preventing it operating in the United Kingdom, and it becomes a criminal offence to belong to or support such an organisation. And the organisation we're discussing today, as has been said, is a white supremacist group founded less than 2 years ago. It has members in North America and Europe, and advocates the use of violence and mass murder in pursuit of an all-out race war. Most of its activity is online, but it does also distribute violent, racist and anti-Semitic propaganda. Right-wing terrorism, as we know, is the fastest growing terror threat in the United Kingdom and indeed in other countries. And the government does need to have a coherent and comprehensive strategy in place to tackle far-right extremism, including availability of resources. And I hope the noble lady, the Minister, can at least outline in her response what that strategy is beyond prescription orders. As the noble lady, the Minister, has said, FKD members have been arrested on terrorism charges in both the UK and overseas. And last year, US authorities charged several individuals with offences, including weapons charges, plotting to bomb a synagogue and attacks on the LGBT community, plotting to bomb a major news network and distributing information relating to explosives and weapons of mass destruction. And in this country, as we know, 10 months ago, police apprehended a 16-year-old on suspicion of the commission, preparation and instigation of acts of terrorism, which led to the group urging members to carry out attacks in retaliation for the arrest of one of their followers. And in October last year, a 21-year-old appeared in court, charged with terror offences relating to his purported support for FKD after allegedly encouraging the mass murder of members of the Jewish and LGBT communities. And group members have also condoned and glorified acts of terrorism, including the Christchurch shooting. In February this year, FKD announced that it would be dissolving, but no reason was given, and it's apparently considered that the group and its members continue to remain active through other channels. As others have said, on the face of it, it is a little odd that when FKD did not seek to hide its existence, the Home Secretary did not take the necessary action to have it prescribed, but that once it claimed it would be dissolving, the Home Secretary did decide to act. Could the noble lady, the Minister, comment on that in her response? When the government say that it's considered that the group and its members remain active through other channels, does that mean they are suspected as likely to have merged with another organisation, or suspected that they may have in effect simply renamed or unnamed themselves, but be operating exactly as before, or operating in a different way, albeit continuing to be concerned in terrorism? If FKD have claimed to be dissolving, does that claim also apply to the United States? Or is it only in this country or in Europe? And if it does apply to the United States, do the US authorities also hold the view that the group and its members remain active through other channels? And can the noble lady, the Minister, confirm that the government do not consider there will be any insuperable difficulty in proving membership of or support for FKD once it has been prescribed, despite its claim that it would be dissolving? We support this order since we are committed to tackling all forms of terrorism and ensuring the safety of our nation and our citizens. And we express our thanks to our police and security services for the work that they do in this regard. I agree there is a strong case to be made for FKD's prescription. I accept that much of the information on which the Home Secretary has based her decision to pursue this order is likely to be of a nature and content that precludes it being disclosed for national security reasons. However, I do hope the noble lady, the Minister, will be able to respond to not only my few brief questions, but also to the questions and points raised by other noble lords who've spoken in this debate.
Minister to reply, Baroness Williams of Trafford.
Well, may I thank all noble lords who've made their points on this prescription debate. And if I could start with the last point the noble Lord, Lord Rosser, made, and just confirm that if I can't answer specific questions, it is precisely for the reasons that they cannot be disclosed. Similarly, on any decision that the Home Secretary might make about proscription, those sorts of decisions are not generally shared. But on the deprescription point that the noble Lord Rosser mentioned, He mentions the difficulty of deprescription applications, but of course last year the government deprescribed, or the Home Secretary deprescribed, the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group following an application from them. So deprescription applications do work. They are a simple form that is used. The Noble Lord Rosser asked the numbers of groups that were currently prescribed. The numbers are 75 plus 14 Northern Ireland groups. In terms of the system by which decisions are made, as I've said, I can't go into the details of it, but what I can comfort Noble Lords by confirming is that the system is based on a range of evidence and taken after extensive consideration and in light of a full assessment of that available information. My noble friend Lord Bourne made the point, can we act swiftly on groups that pose us a threat? Absolutely we can, but what we do need to do, given the impact that this has on people, is be very careful that we make the right decision based on the full evidence that we have before us. If I could, the Noble Lord Lord Hussein made the point about foreign governments' request for prescription, deprescription, extradition, or any of that type of activity. My Lords, a government does not and will not make decisions based on the pressures from a foreign government, or indeed based on political pressure, because that would be quite against the democratic process. The Home Secretary makes decisions based on the facts before him or her. A number of Noble Lords have asked why now and why. My Lords, why now? Because decisions whether to prescribe this organisation have been taken after extensive consideration and in light of a full assessment of available information. The Noble Lords Bowness and also my noble friend Lady Altman asked about what happens when we leave the EU and do we consult member states. We do engage with other member states on intelligence sharing. That will not change when we leave the European Union. In fact, I recall the noble Lady Manningham-Buller, making that very point in this House, that intelligence sharing will always go on within or without of the EU. Noble Lord Bowness made the point that the group claims to have dissolved. Well, we can be quite cynical about that. I think what we require is evidence of ongoing threat or not. And when we leave the European Union, we want as robust a security arrangement as we possibly can. I won't, for the reasons I've already outlined, comment on the White Helmets or any other groups, and I certainly won't be commenting on the Shamima Begum case. The government will be considering, the Home Secretary will consider the court's judgment, note it and decide what next steps to take. My noble friend Lady Altman asked about are the police being adequately resourced to deal with groups like this, and she asked about CT policing specifically. My Lords, it's ring-fenced, and I am quite certain that not only are CT police being adequately resourced, but the 20,000 new police officers that we will have going forward will very adequately meet the changing demands of policing. The Noble Lord asked about ministerial discussion with Estonia. I've already said that we do engage with other nations, I can't actually confirm whether we engage with Estonia on this particular case. There was one final point that I was going to make that seems to have escaped me, but it might come back to me. I literally can't remember. But, my lords, I think they are the main points, and with that, I beg to move.
The question is that this motion be agreed to. As many as are of that opinion will say content. Contrary not content, the contents have it.
My lords, I beg to move the House to now adjourn during pleasure until 2:45 p.m.
The question is that the House to now adjourn until 2:45 p.m. for the committee stage on the Agriculture Bill. As many as are of that opinion shall say content. Contrary not content, the contents have it.